I was recently watching a high-level briefing where officials stood in front of these massive glowing maps, pointing at strategic dots in the Arctic and South America. They were talking about bold acquisitions like Greenland and decisive maneuvers in Venezuela. The energy in the room was electric. It felt like a classic display of superpower dominance, the kind of theater that looks incredibly powerful on the nightly news. It was the ultimate 20th century image of strength flags, territory, and maps. But later that day, I sat down with a supply chain analyst who had just returned from an industrial tour across East Asia. I asked him what he thought of the map strategy everyone was buzzing about. He didn't give me a political critique. Instead, he pulled up a series of boring-looking spreadsheets and technical diagrams on his tablet. He pointed to a line item for rare earth processing and high-speed rail integration. While we're obsessed with who owns the land, he told me quietly, they're making sure they're the only ones who can actually make the land productive. It was a jarring shift. While Washington performs geopolitics for the cameras, Beijing is busy engineering the future. They aren't chasing the headlines of reality show diplomacy. They are focusing on long-term industrial lock-ins, AI embedded into manufacturing, battery supply chains, and infrastructure that makes them unavoidable. To them, power isn't about where your flag flies. It's about whose systems the world is forced to run on. This contrast left me with a disturbing thought. We might be cheering for a team that is winning the wrong game. If America continues to treat global power like a theater of spectacle while China treats it like a massive engineering project, the outcome isn't just predictable, it's already being built. It makes you wonder, what happens when we finally secure the map, only to realize we've lost the systems that make the map matter?
It's a really powerful way to frame it. And it forces a complete recalibration of how we even define a superpower in this century.
Right.
We're so conditioned to look for the aircraft carriers, the diplomatic summits, the big speeches. But if you actually look at the reality on the ground, the true metric of power might just be refining vats and fiber optic cables.
And that is exactly the mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack this specific shift. We're moving away from that sort of risk board game version of the world.
Flags on a map.
Exactly. The borders, the flags, the treaties. And we're looking at the dominance of systems. And I have to warn you, the stack of sources we're working through today is, it's pretty heavy.
It's dense stuff.
It really is.
All right.
We are not looking at opinion pieces or hot takes. We have U.S. Congressional Select Committee reports, very dense industrial analyses from the EU, and some really complex academic papers on this concept of the civilizational state.
And what's so fascinating is how all those heavy documents, from the very dry government reports to the sociological studies, they all point to this one fundamental divergence.
Which is what?
Well, you have the West, which is really focused on the software of democracy, the debates, the elections, the diplomatic communiques, all the rhetoric around values. And then the sources argue that China is operating with a total singular focus on the hardware of civilization.
And when you say hardware, you mean literal hardware?
I mean physical infrastructure, supply chains, processing capacity, the nuts and bolts.
Okay, so let's set the ground rules for today. We are not doing a political debate. We're not arguing communism versus democracy in that philosophical sense.
No.
We're looking at engineering reality. The question is, how do you build a machine that the rest of the world has no choice but to plug into?
It's about utility as power. It's about becoming the operating system of the planet. And the best place to start understanding that machine is, well, it's at the atomic level.
The invisible empire.
Exactly. This is the foundation that everything else rests on.
So let's zoom in. I want to start with a narrative from our research that really stuck with me. It's about a process engineer, a man named Chen, who works deep inside a battery gigafactory in Fujian province.
Okay.
Now you have to picture this. Chen is standing in front of a massive humming vat of lithium iron phosphate slurry. It's hot, the air smells of chemical solvents, and the noise is just this constant industrial drone. He's not looking at a map of the South China Sea.
No, his concerns are far more microscopic.
He's obsessed with purity. While politicians in Washington or Brussels are giving these big speeches about reclaiming influence or drawing lines in the ocean, Chen knows that the world's entire energy transition,
Everything.
every electric car driving through London, every grid storage unit in California, every single laptop in a Berlin cafe, it actually passes through his fingers.
He's at the choke point.
He is the choke point. And there's this great anecdote in the source material where he jokes with his colleagues that sovereignty used to be measured by how much land you could plant a flag on.
Yeah.
But now, He says it's measured by how many microns of precision you can maintain in a separator membrane inside a battery cell.
That vignette is so important. It really captures the shift from the visible to the invisible. It's a cold dominance. It's not flashy.
No, not at all.
It's just technical discipline. When we watch the news, we see the hot conflicts, the military stuff. But Chen represents the cold reality of supply chain control.
And it feels almost alchemical, like
Yes.
he's some kind of modern-day wizard turning dirt into energy.
Alchemy is actually the perfect word. And this brings us to the first major technical hurdle we have to unpack, which the sources call a processing trap.
Let's break that down, because when I hear strategic minerals or rare earths, I immediately picture a mine.
Yeah.
You know, a big hole in the ground in Africa or Australia or Nevada.
And that is the mistake that most policymakers make. They think if you have the rock, you have the power.
But that's not the case.
Not at all. The data from the rare earth choke point source is very clear. China has about 69% of the mining resources. And look, that's a lot, certainly, but it's not a total monopoly.
Right. Other countries have these rocks.
Exactly. Vietnam has them, Brazil has them, the US has them. The rocks are fairly distributed.
Okay, so if the rocks are everywhere, where is the chokehold?
It's in the processing, the refining, the part that happens after the mining. The data shows China controls somewhere between 85% and 95% of the refining capacity globally.
85 to 95%.
And for the really important stuff, the heavy rare earths, we're talking about dysprosium and terbium that you absolutely need for advanced military magnets, it's basically 100%.
100%. So walk me through the implication here. If a company, say, opens a mine in California tomorrow, and they dig up a ton of ore, they can't just put it in a car.
Absolutely not. They can't use it. It's just a rock. They have to put those American rocks on a ship, send them to China to be processed into a usable metal, and then buy them back.
But why? Is it just cheaper labor? Or is there something more technical going on? I mean, why can't we just build our own refineries?
It's a combination of things. It's complex chemistry and something you could call environmental arbitrage.
Environmental arbitrage.
Yeah. Rare earth elements are notoriously difficult to separate. They're chemically almost identical to one another, so they cling together in the ore. To separate them requires hundreds of stages of acid baths, solvent extraction, and incredibly high heat.
And that sounds messy.
It's unbelievably messy. It produces a massive amount of toxic waste. We're talking stuff that is often radioactive because thorium is usually mixed in with the ore.
So Beijing just made a choice that the West wasn't willing to make.
Yes. Over the last 30 years, they basically decided to eat the environmental cost. They subsidized the industry to keep prices so artificially low that no Western company could possibly compete.
Which brings us to Molycorp.
Molycorp, the perfect example. The sources go into this. This was the big American company that tried to restart the Mountain Pass mine in California a few years ago.
I remember reading about them. It was heralded as the great return of American independence in mining. A huge deal. But they went bankrupt.
Spectacularly. And the crucial point is, it wasn't because they were bad at mining. It was because every single time Molycorp tried to get a foothold, Chinese producers would flood the global market with cheap rare earths, drop the price below the cost of production, and just bleed Molycorp dry.
They just couldn't survive.
They couldn't. And the congressional report has a name for this. They describe it as a loaded gun strategy.
That is a terrifying metaphor, a loaded gun.
And it comes from a quote that's referenced in the Select Committee report. Back in 1992, Deng Xiaoping said, "There is oil in the Middle East, there is rare earth in China."
1992, that's over 30 years ago. This wasn't an accident.
Exactly. That wasn't an observation. It was a directive. It was a 30-year plan to build a monopoly using what they call predatory pricing.
And the playbook is simple.
Incredibly simple. Overproduce. Drop prices to kill any startups or competitors like Molycorp. And then, once the competition is dead, you can raise prices or, even more powerfully, weaponize the supply. It's not an accident. It's an engineered outcome.
And we are seeing that weaponization happen right now. There was a detail in the late 2025 sources regarding new export controls that honestly kept me up at night. They call it the 0.1% rule. Can we explain that to the listener?
This is a major escalation. The new export control regulations state that if a product contains even 0.1% of specific Chinese-sourced rare earths, the company exporting that product requires a license from Beijing to ship it.
0.1%.
Yeah.
That's a trace amount. I mean, that's effectively dust in the machinery.
It's a homeopathic dose of geopolitical control. But think about what that touches. It's not just the magnet itself. It's the motor that holds the magnet, the car that holds the motor, the ship that carries the car. If that tiny trace element is Chinese, the whole chain is theoretically subject to their oversight.
So it's not just about stopping exports. It's about gaining visibility.
It's total visibility. To get the license, you have to tell them who you are selling to, what you are building, what its purpose is. And the military hardware implications are staggering.
The sources specifically mention the F-35.
Right. The F-35 fighter jet, it uses about 900 pounds of rare earths. The Virginia-class submarine uses 9,200 pounds.
9,000 pounds.
An incredible amount. So if I'm a defense contractor and I can't verify the origin of every single gram of that 0.1%.
Theoretically, you cannot build your defense systems without China's permission.
Or at the very least, without China having full visibility into your supply chain via that licensing process, you're handing them your entire industrial blueprint. One analyst in the material called it the economic equivalent of nuclear war.
Wow. That brings us right back to Chen, doesn't it? The engineer in Fujian.
It always comes back to him.
We're looking at the map, celebrating where the mines are, but he controls the process that makes the mines useful. Purity is the new border. If you can't refine it, you don't really own it.
And that's just the first layer of this whole thing. If the first layer is controlling the atoms, the materials, the second layer is about delivering the infrastructure to move them.
Right.
It's not just about having the resource, it's about the state capacity to mobilize it.
The legitimacy of delivery.
Correct. And this is where that engineering mindset applies to the state itself.
I want to pivot to another story here, another person. This one is about a guy named Zhang, a construction foreman. The sources describe him spending 5 years of his life working on the high-speed rail link through the karst mountains of Guizhou province.
And for context, the geography in Guizhou is a nightmare for engineers. It's just limestone, caves, steep canyons, unstable ground. I mean, it is probably the last place on Earth you would choose to build a high-speed train.
Right. So try to imagine the sheer scale of this. Zhang isn't just laying tracks on flat ground. He is boring through solid rock, building these massive concrete arches that span dizzying canyons. It's stuff that looks like it belongs in a science fiction movie.
An incredible feat of engineering.
And here's the payoff. Before this rail line existed, the villagers in his hometown had to travel 12 hours on these winding, dangerous bus routes just to reach the nearest major city.
12 hours. That means you effectively live in a different world. You can't commute, you can't easily sell your goods, you can't access a major hospital in an emergency, you're cut off.
Exactly. But now, it takes 40 minutes.
40 minutes.
And Zhang says his proudest moment wasn't the ribbon-cutting ceremony or the speech by the party official. It was seeing an elderly woman from his village bring her mountain-grown oranges to the city market for the very first time. Her face just lit up by the hum of this 300-kilometer-per-hour train.
It's a really powerful image, but it also illustrates a very different concept of government than what we're used to in the West. It bridges the gap between the abstract idea of the state and an individual's daily life.
And this brings us to that concept from the sources, the idea of the civilizational state.
Yes. This comes from the paper by Zhang Weiwei. And it's crucial to understand this distinction because it explains the why behind all this construction. In the West, we have the nation state.
The Westphalian model.
Right. It's defined by borders, political ideology, procedural rules. A civilizational state, which describes China, but you could argue also applies to places like India or Russia, is an amalgam of an ancient, continuous culture and a massive modern state structure.
The source mentioned the four supers.
Right. Super large population, super vast territory, super long traditions, and super rich cultures. And the point is, when you're managing something of that scale, 1.4 billion people across a continent-sized landmass, your legitimacy can't just come from procedure.
Meaning it doesn't just come from holding an election every 4 years.
Exactly. In the West, we are so focused on procedural democracy. Did you follow the rules? Did people vote? If yes, the government is considered legitimate even if nothing gets done, even if the bridge collapses.
The process is the point.
The process is the point. The argument here is that China focuses on substantive democracy, or what they call performance legitimacy.
The concept of minxin.
Minxin, the hearts and minds of the people. In this worldview, legitimacy comes directly from the results. Did the bridge get built? Did the train arrive on time? Did the travel time for that woman with the oranges go from 12 hours to 40 minutes? If the answer is yes, the state has the mandate. It's
a real challenge to the Western mindset. We assume that if you don't vote, the system is illegitimate by default. But if the system delivers a 350-kilometer-per-hour train that lets your grandmother sell her oranges.
You might view freedom a little differently.
Right. You might view it as freedom from poverty or freedom of mobility or freedom from isolation.
And the scale of that delivery is just staggering. I mean, the sources cite that China now has 162,000 kilometers of railway lines.
And 50,000 kilometers of that is high speed.
To put that in perspective for you, that is more high-speed rail than the rest of the world combined. And they're already shifting the goalposts. It's no longer about ensuring people can travel. It's about ensuring they can travel well. The new standard on major lines is becoming 350 kilometers per hour.
You know, as someone who analyzes state capacity, Zhang's story is just incredibly telling. It's a perfect example of delivering tangible public goods. In the U.S., we get bogged down for years, sometimes decades, in environmental impact studies or partisan bickering over a single bridge.
The term for it is vetocracy.
Vetocracy, exactly. Everybody has a veto. But this story illustrates an institutional efficiency that is, well, it's jarring. It's the difference between talking about progress and literally building the floor that the next generation is going to walk on.
And it's not just about convenience for the grandmother with the oranges. We have to look at the strategic implication of this network. This is about national resilience. It's about unification.
How so? How does a train equate to resilience?
Well, think about it. High-speed rail is a tool of control and integration. It turns a vast, fragmented territory into a single, manageable system. If you have a crisis in one province, say a natural disaster, social unrest, or even a military mobilization, you can move resources, medical supplies, or troops to that location in a matter of hours, not days.
It physically integrates the economy.
It makes the civilizational state function as a singular machine. It's the nervous system of the giant.
Okay, so let's recap where we are. We've got the materials, the atoms controlled by people like Chen and the refining monopoly.
Yeah.
We have the infrastructure, the arteries, built by people like Zhang.
Right.
Now we need to talk about the ecosystem, the muscle that actually builds things.
The indispensable ecosystem.
Exactly. And for this, I want to introduce one last character. Let's imagine an entrepreneur named Sarah. She's American, brilliant, formerly based in Silicon Valley. She has a groundbreaking design for a new kind of robotics component, something that could revolutionize warehouse automation. But she moved to Suzhou, near Shanghai, to launch her startup.
Why leave the valley? I mean, that's supposed to be the innovation capital of the world. That's where all the venture capital is.
Because of what she calls the gravity. I saw an interview where she described it. She tried to source specialized sensors and precision gears in Europe and North America. The lead times were months.
Months.
The components were scattered across continents.
Yeah.
One part from Germany, another from Ohio, one from Japan.
That's a logistics nightmare. You'd spend more time managing shipping containers than you would on actual engineering.
Right, but in Suzhou, she found that every single supplier she needed, from specialized alloy casters to automated assembly line designers, was within a 30-minute drive of her office.
30 minutes.
She described it not as a supply chain or a factory, but as a living organism.
That concept of the living organism is so important. It's what economists call agglomeration effects, but on steroids. It's not just that the factories are close to each other, it's that they all speak the same industrial language. They're interconnected.
And for Sarah, the political spectacle of trade wars and tariffs felt like distant noise. The reality for her was the physical infrastructure she was standing in. If she wanted to prototype a new part, she can have it in her hand in 24 hours. In the U.S., she said, that would take weeks, maybe months.
And this is where the U.S. Select Committee report gets really, really anxious. They fear that this ecosystem has become a trap for innovation.
Explain that. How is efficiency a trap? That seems counterintuitive.
Well, the sources argue the U.S. is still great at the 0 to 1. We invent the new technology. We have the best research labs at MIT and Stanford. We come up with the big breakthroughs.
Okay.
But we lack the midstream ecosystem, the 1 to 1 million.
We can invent it, but we can't scale it.
We can't scale it. Exactly. We don't have the casting plants, the tool and die shops, the screw manufacturers all clustered in one place anymore. So innovators like Sarah are forced to go to China to scale up.
So China takes the American invention.
They take the U.S. invention, they scale it, they drive down the costs using that living organism efficiency, and eventually they dominate the global market for the very thing we invented in the first place.
It's a sobering thought. You can have the best idea in the world, but if you can't build it at scale, you don't really own it.
Utility makes influence. And this isn't just about domestic manufacturing. It's about how China exports this utility to the rest of the world. This is where the domestic machine becomes foreign policy.
Which brings us to a metaphor from one of our sources that I absolutely loved, the battle for infrastructure. It compares the current state of Western influence to a vintage suitcase.
It's such a harsh line. Elegant, nostalgically familiar, but cumbersome and impractical.
It hurts because it rings true, doesn't it? The West travels to the developing world, and we offer communiques, values, and diplomatic papers. We offer lectures on good governance and transparency.
And China offers steel and fiber optic cable. When a country in Southeast Asia or South America needs development, they don't want a lecture. They want a port to ship their goods from. They want a railway to move their people.
And once they get that railway,
they are locked in. This is influence via dependency. You look at the China-Laos Railway or the Jakarta-Bandung high-speed rail. These are not charity projects. They are geopolitical arteries.
How do they create dependency, though? Is it just about debt?
It's much deeper than debt. It's about standardization. Once a country's entire logistics network runs on Chinese rail standards, we're talking the track gauge, the digital signaling systems, the maintenance software, their economy becomes hardwired to Beijing.
You can't just switch providers.
You can't. You can't just run a German train on a system that was built for Chinese digital signals without ripping everything out and starting over.
It reminds me of the tech world. It's like getting locked into the Apple ecosystem. Once you have the iPhone, the Mac, and the watch, it's really, really painful to switch to Android.
That is a brilliant analogy. China is building the iOS of global infrastructure. And it extends to the maritime world, too. The sources spend a lot of time on the Shanxi port in Peru.
I've seen this on the news. A massive new deep-water port.
It's a smart port, fully automated. And it's going to reduce shipping time from South America to Asia by 10 days. That is a massive economic benefit for Peru and all of its neighbors. But it also means that the trade flow, the literal lifeblood of those economies, is now flowing through a Chinese-controlled node.
So it's a strategic dot on the map, sure, but its power comes from being a systemic link. It's not a military base, it's a router for the global economy.
Exactly. And if you control the router, you control the data and you control the flow. You can prioritize your own traffic, or in a crisis, you can shut it down.
So we have painted a pretty overwhelming picture here. The materials, the infrastructure, the ecosystem, it feels like a machine that is already built and running. But to be fair, the West isn't completely asleep at the wheel anymore. The sources do show that the US and Europe are waking up.
They are waking up, yes. But the question is, are they waking up to the right reality? Or are they still trying to play the old game with new pieces?
Let's look at the response then. The opening I read mentioned that Washington performs geopolitics for the cameras. But the sources show that behind the scenes, there is a real sense of panic. The Select Committee report explicitly states, and this is a quote, that free market principles do not work against a state-directed monopoly.
That is a massive admission for the U.S. government. They are essentially saying, capitalism as we know it can't fight this. They make a direct comparison to the OPEC oil embargo of 1973.
But they also note that this mineral dependency is actually worse than the oil crisis. Why is that?
Because oil, at the end of the day, is a commodity. You extract it, you ship it, you burn it. You can stockpile barrels of crude oil in a cave or a tanker. These minerals require that complex, toxic, know-how intensive processing we talked about.
It's alchemy.
The alchemy. You need the chemical engineers like Chen. You need the specialized facilities. You can't just stockpile the raw rock. The dependency is technical, not just geological.
So what are the strategies on the table? What is the U.S. actually doing about it?
Well, the U.S. has launched a mine-to-magnet strategy. The Department of Defense is investing about $439 million to try and rebuild the entire supply chain domestically. They want to be able to go from the mine in the ground to the finished magnet without ever touching China.
$439 million. I don't want to be cynical, but in the context of the global economy, that feels small.
It is a drop in the bucket. Compare that to the decades of state-subsidized investment China has poured in. We are talking hundreds of billions versus hundreds of millions. China built this with a whatever-it-takes budget over 30 years. We are trying to fix it with a pilot program budget in 3.
And then there's the de-risking dilemma we talked about. As we saw at Sarah's story, you can't just build a factory in Arizona and expect it to work like Suzuki.
Right. You can build the building, you can buy the machines, but you don't have the ecosystem. You don't have the suppliers down the street. You don't have the skilled workforce that has been doing this exact thing for 20 years. Rebuilding that industrial commons takes decades. You have to train a whole new generation of Chens and Zhangs.
Well, what about the Europeans? What's their plan?
The EU has the Critical Raw Materials Act. They've mandated that no more than 65% of their dependency for any single strategic material can come from one country.
Which is a very polite, diplomatic way of saying we need to buy from someone other than China.
Correct. But again, these are legislative goals. They're pieces of paper. The source, the battle for infrastructure, is quite critical here. It suggests the US and the EU are still being sluggish. We're passing laws and holding hearings while the other side is pouring concrete and refining dysprosium.
It really feels like we are trying to legislate our way out of an engineering problem.
And that is the core tension. You cannot regulate your way to industrial dominance. You have to build it. And right now, the momentum of the physical world, the hardware of civilization, is tilting away from the West.
So let's try to summarize what we've unpacked today. This has been a lot of information, but it seems to fall into three distinct layers.
I think so. First, you have the materials. That's the world of Chen, controlling the atoms, the purity, the processing, the ability to turn raw earth into power.
Second, the infrastructure. That's the world of Zhang, unifying the state through high-speed rail and these massive engineering projects, creating a legitimacy based on delivery, not just on voting.
And third, the ecosystem. That's the world of Sarah, creating a manufacturing gravity well that locks in the rest of the world's innovators and economies. Its utility makes influence.
It really is a conflict between two different operating systems. The 20th century focus on maps and flags versus the 21st century focus on systems and flows.
And the danger is that you can win the map. You can have the most allies, the most military bases, the most diplomatic clout, and still lose the world. Because the systems that actually keep the lights on, keep the data moving, and keep the cars driving are controlled by someone else.
The sources today paint a picture of two different worlds colliding. One is fighting for headlines and territory. The other is fighting for the plumbing of the global economy. It leaves us with a lingering realization. In 20 years, when we look back at this era, we might realize that while we were busy debating who leads the world, another power was busy building the machine that the world actually runs on. And if that machine is already built, we may find that it's simply too late to unplug it.